Hey, everybody, welcome. I'm Brian Julius. I'm the Chief Content Officer for Enterprise DNA, and I've got a great roundtable of Enterprise DNA experts here today. We're going to try something a little different. Normally, we do technical roundtables, but we've been getting a lot of feedback from members and other folks that there's a lot of interest in career content. And so folks looking to enter the data analytics career field or to advance their careers. And so we're starting to develop some more content related to the more general kind of career path and development space. And so what we wanted to do today was kind of start that off with a discussion of one of the most important aspects of that advancement, which is the interview. And so what I've done is compiled a list of 10 very common questions that you might encounter in an interview. They're actually taken from real interviews. In some cases, they're questions I've used myself in interviewing analysts. And the panelists haven't seen these questions, so they're going to be getting them as if they were interviewees. We'll talk about kind of individual perspectives on these questions, and at the end, those of us who've been hiring managers responsible for evaluating and hiring analyst candidates may talk about it from that perspective as well. So we'll see how far we get on the list. But what I was hoping everybody could do briefly is just kind of go around the grid and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your journey into how you got into the data analytics space. I know for a number of you, it was a straight path, and for others, it was a more winding road and an interesting story. So if you can each kind of just run through that. Jared, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, Jared Moore. Been doing data analytics for probably a little over 20 years now. Mostly on the finance side is my background. Even in college, background was in finance, and then it was in 2017 on a webinar that I was introduced to this product called Power BI, which I found out later was called Power BI. And ever since then, have been using Power BI in my day-to-day role as a data analyst. So almost 4 years, for almost 5 years now. So
great. Greg?
For me, I'm trained as an engineer. I worked as an engineer for 10 years. I've been involved in software for about 20. The last 10 or so, I've been a consultant to the Canadian government, federal government, doing database, data warehouse, SQL, SSRS work primarily, I guess. And I started migrating into Power BI about 3 years ago. And yeah. It's going well.
Great.
The takeoff is huge.
Mm-hmm. For me, I started my journey for studying statistics in 2008. After that, I studied biostatistics as a master's degree in 2013. And now I'm a clinical trial analyst in a biopharmaceutical company, and also a Power BI consultant for this company. And I've never imagined that by studying statistics, I will be a Power BI analyst or Power BI consultant. And I'm really happy because I really like Power BI, because I think that I can apply so many statistical analysis into Power BI, import so many analysis, and it will empower or report or dashboard.
Great. George?
I'm George Mount. I am doing an R for Power BI course at the moment, and my journey started about 10 years ago when I got out of school and was quickly met with the realization I didn't know how to work with data. And that set me on a journey of improving, helping others improve, and really looking at these questions of what makes a good analyst, how do you get into analytics, and so forth. It's an important topic, and it's great to hear that people are asking about it and that we can talk about it now.
Thanks. Galen?
Hi, I'm Galen Holland. I originally got into analytics from a career in science. I had a very brief career in science where I was a biologist and quickly found out you couldn't make any money that way. So I moved over to analytics. And I've been doing that for probably the last 15 years or so. And I think it's a great field because, you can definitely add a lot of value to different businesses. So, and Power BI is a great tool that allows you to leverage a lot of that.
Great, thanks. As I mentioned, I'm Brian Julius. I started out in economics and econometrics, and that kind of led to a broader array of topics that I dealt with analytically from a consulting job that I started, and then moved into for the next 30 years after that into working for the federal government, doing environmental data analysis, and then into managing analysts. And then in the last few years, kind of back into the project management of a smaller analytics team. And then finally to Enterprise DNA as their content manager. So thanks, everybody. Interesting journeys. Why don't we jump right into the questions? And I'll start with a more general one, which is to talk about your overall process for developing a report or analysis for using a data set you've never seen before. You want to jump and grab that one first?
Sure. For me, it's what questions do you want to answer? If I don't know the data, I probably don't know the business area at all. So I'll be depending upon the business analyst to hopefully come up with some initial questions that they want answered. And very quickly, we need to focus in on those decisions so that we bring in the minimum amount of data. If they are only interested in making a decision on what's been going on in the last year, I don't want to bring in 30 years worth of data to slow everything down. So we'll just bring in 1 year. What do they actually need to use to make the decision or to answer the question? And that's where I focus.
Other thoughts, other processes, factors that you take into account?
Yeah, certainly begin with the end in mind. It's the important part. Greg covered that pretty well. Also, doing a bit of detective work and what is that quote? Trust but verify, right? When you get data, and you have to go back to the source, figure out what were the processes, because data doesn't just grow on trees, right? Like money. You have to kind of figure out where it came from, and it doesn't just show up on your computer. Chances are that somebody probably entered it in at some point, or it was scanned in, or there was some kind of physical process, and we all make mistakes. So going back to that part is important too. But yes, exactly. So once you have that, it's almost like taking stock, or it's like a recipe in a way, right? It's one of those episodes of Chopped where you see what you have, and then you want to make something, but you see where you are, and you have to kind of meet in the middle, and there is some tug of war going on there. But yeah, so you're kind of beginning with the end in mind, but also seeing what you have at the same time.
Hossein, do you have something you want to jump in with?
Yeah. If I don't know the data, the first thing that I do is search about it. Usually I go to YouTube and try to watch some videos about this the area. For example, for the challenge number 13, the Formula One data, I searched YouTube, I saw some videos, and I found some interesting information about the area of the challenge. And then what I do, I usually go to the tables in Excel usually, and try to find some patterns, the relationship between tables, the important columns, the most important columns in each table, and try to understand the columns that I want to use them to create the basic and the first measures. And that's why that's how I start to create reports.
It's interesting. I think you mentioned the challenges, and the one we've got currently going, challenge 17, with the environmental data, is kind of a new type of data to a lot of people, and so I think they're going through much that same process in kind of
exactly.
figuring out kind of what the data is, how to work with it, and kind of getting some background on the larger context behind the data. So good points.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like that Hussein brought up visualizing early and often. And we think of visualizations as maybe something we do at the end, or maybe something that is kind of secondary to sizing up the data, but that can quickly tell you what's going on. So, don't be afraid to just plot the visualizations, look at those relationships, because that really is going to give you insights maybe a lot quicker than you just trying to scroll through and look at things. We can't process numbers often as well as charts. So don't be afraid to visualize things.
Yeah, one additional thing that I would add is I like to visualize the data as well. So I'll open up like a blank page in a Power BI report and dump all the data from the actual table there. I can actually visualize it, maybe throw a few slicers out there and see how the data looks when I slice the data. So that's another step that I would add in that process, because a lot of times, even if you are not familiar with the data, once you see it on the screen there, you can kind of, at least with the background that some of us have here on this session here, that we can kind of tend to see some things that we might want to use moving forward.
Yeah, I agree with that very much. I do that all the time. I keep a whole mess of hidden work pages in my PBIX files, and I do exactly that.
Yeah, one thing I like to do is kind of make a little tiny mini report, because the one thing I don't want to do is like waste my time if, like you've gone through and like, say, if you look at averages or you've done some trends, and you can send that quickly back to the stakeholder and just see if it's correct. Because, you might go through that whole process of creating a report, and then you turn it in and there might be some issues with the data and the whole thing is wrong. So I usually like to get in there quickly, and I think everybody's kind of mentioned, do some exploratory data analysis, quick visuals, and send them to the stakeholders just as a validation step.
Yeah, no, that's really, really important, because it's often the people that are asking the questions, they also kind of know what the answers might be, or at least orders of magnitude. So if you can say, for example, they want to see total sales each year, and I said, well, it should be around, I don't know, $400,000 each year. So something around there. So if you come out with $27, you're wrong. You got something to fix up.
Well, and Greg, I want to follow up on it. You gave kind of perfect entree into one of my next questions, which is, tell me about a time you or your team were surprised by the results of a project.
What do you mean by surprised by the results? Like we're way off here, or like?
Well, I think it's more that the analysis produced results or conclusions that were very different than what you'd expected.
I'd say that happens quite a bit. Believe it or not, even in my day-to-day, I work typically with the same industry, and it's amazing how I go from one company to another, and they do things completely different, but they're kind of using the same data fields, data points, and it's like, how did I get that for these folks? And I mean, is this right or is it wrong? So you almost have to verify what you're, going back to what George said there. What I think it was Ronald Reagan that said that: trust but verify. And I believe that's where I've been surprised before. Is like, is it really this bad, or is it really this good? And I think that's when I kind of question myself, is when the data looks a whole lot better than what probably should, or what I'm used to seeing. That's when it kind of raises question marks in my head.
Yeah, I always like to tell analysts, when they're trying to put their project together, that you want to think of your role as almost like the myth buster. It's even worth watching a couple episodes, because it's the idea that there's something that's just taken for granted by people, or maybe there's some urban legend, and your role is to actually put that to the test and give a result. Knowing that there is going to be a sweet spot between your stakeholders thinking, oh, well, I already knew that, versus I don't believe that, right? You want to find some place in that area, and starting at a point where it is, kind of, well, if you can get them to admit that they haven't really examined it, and you can be that kind of myth buster and give them those results that are going to be surprising either way. That's a good angle to be in too. No matter what you give them, they're going to be maybe surprised by it because they haven't tested it for themselves. But at the same time, they do have that frame of reference that it is an important question to begin with.
I think that's a really important point, George, about, kind of, it gets to a data storytelling issue, which is not only presenting kind of that counterintuitive conclusion, but leading them to how you got there. Because I think you're right. I think that if you just kind of present that kind of shockingly counterintuitive conclusion, it's something like, well, there must be something wrong with the analysis or the data, but if you can really lead people to that. And there was one I had a while back with a client where they were having a problem with a centralized service, and they were saying, the service is just really slow. We're getting bad outcomes. It's taking too long to process these things. And I remember really tearing that apart into components. And what I found was really surprising, which was, we'd all kind of assumed the problem was at the centralized service level. And what we found was the problem was actually at the client level. And it was the client managers taking way too long to approve their steps in the process. And so when you presented it kind of broken down and you saw where the variance was, it was all at the client level, not at the centralized service level. And so, I think had I told them that is kind of just a blanket conclusion, they would have been like, no, that can't be right. It's not our fault. But when you break it down into components and you show them, here's, a 20-day lag, here's an average 15-day lag, that then becomes a much more compelling story.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I have that similar experience almost on a daily basis of clients emailing me saying that this is no longer working. Well, I didn't change anything on my end. It has to be the bad data that's being inputted. So if anything, a lot of my clients are learning that, when they put in bad data, they're going to get bad results. So it's nothing that's really changed on my end. It's the bad data that's being entered.
For me, it's somehow different when it comes to data storytelling. When I remember when I created the first page of Power BI report for this department, they was totally shocked because I created a measure showing the total export amount. And because they were working with Excel tables, actually, they didn't expect to see the total amount of exports for example, 6 or 7 years, and they were so surprised. And when I told them that they can use slicers, they can filter the data to see every year results, they found it so interesting.
Yeah, you can get people hooked on slicers really easily. Okay, so I want to move in a little different direction for the next one. That a lot of times when we're talking about data analytics, we're talking about hard skills, technical skills, programming, statistics, Power BI. But what do you think the soft skills are that are essential for a data analyst, and why?
Definitely being able to communicate. And that's going to be, the most important thing. Being able to tell a story is important. Also being able to break something that's complex down into something, digestible to the whole audience. And even reading the room is important. I think there's a lot of soft skills that you need to learn if you're presenting data or you're doing an analysis, because usually when you're doing that, there's going to be someone that's maybe into hardcore statistics in the room, and then maybe someone that, they don't even know what an average is. So I think, communication is super important.
Yeah, very much. I'd agree with that. And being able to identify, talk at different levels to different stakeholders groups. Mm-hmm. So you can talk to the business analysts in their domain language, and you can talk to the IT people in their domain language.
Yeah, and peeling it back even further to understand, well, why is data analytics so valuable to begin with? And why is it so prevalent? To get into related topics like digital transformation and innovation and things like that, just so you have a sense of all this being contextualized. I would also say, start reading something like the Wall Street Journal, or read a couple of Michael Lewis books or something like that. Get the business intuition, because then you're going to be able to go into a different industry and understand what the major drivers are, what's going on in that industry, what the tensions are, and things like that. So having that kind of business sixth sense is going to really help you out a lot when you're a data analyst.
That's a great point.
One of the fastest ways to get buy-in to is just to leverage that and say, what are your pain points? Find out when the analysts or the directors are saying, I really hate it when then you figure out what data do we need to shape an answer to a question that will allow them to alleviate that pain point.
Yep. A lot of these skills are probably at times even more important than what we do as data analysts or analysts on a day-to-day basis. These skills right here, sometimes it's pretty hard to teach those skills. So if somebody has those skills, and let's say that they're lacking in maybe some of the other areas, that's definitely somebody that I would be definitely interested in moving forward with.
Going back to Galem's point about communication, Galem, if I'm not mistaken, on your absent data channel, didn't you have one? There's one about the top tools for data analysts, and I may have this wrong, but didn't you have PowerPoint as number one on that one?
Yeah, I put PowerPoint as number one. I mean, because that's the tool that everyone uses across departments, right? PowerPoint. And a slide is going to let you communicate a lot of information in a very kind of simple way. I mean, dashboards do have their place, and definitely you want people to dig into them and slice the data that you want. But I think for storytelling, I mean, I still use PowerPoint more than I use anything else.
It was funny because when I saw that video, at first I was like, really, PowerPoint number one? And then, with all the powerful tools we've got out there, and then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, you could really make a strong case for that, because the best analysis in the world, if not communicated clearly, isn't worth a damn.
Yeah.
And, people say, well, the analysis speaks for itself. Well, it really doesn't, and particularly to, a manager who's really busy and is not going to have the time to click through a million slicers and navigate through pages. And, they want to get the bottom line. And I think, the more I thought about that, it was challenging when I first saw it, but I thought, I actually think I think I'm on board with that idea. But it was a challenging video that I'd highly recommend people take a look at. Any other thoughts on that one?
I would just agree with that. It seems that by far the most important thing to directors is the PDF export of a report. So no interactivity, no slicers, no nothing. You just want the PDF export.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's a hard lesson to learn, being
it is. It is.
I
mean, really you can spend hours and days and days and days designing the most interactive report, and the guys who are using it will not use 1% of what you designed.
Yeah. And that's the beautiful thing about, Power BI, when you upload everything to the service, you can start looking at some of the user analytics. and you realize you spent 15 hours on a report and maybe people have spent like 3 minutes looking at it. So yeah, I totally agree. Just exporting that out into maybe the view that, a stakeholder wants to see it usually gets a lot more buy-in at that point.
Yeah, great points. Great points. So which step of the data analysis process do you enjoy the most and why?
For me, it's the first step, because when I don't know a data set, I force myself to search about it. I learn a lot about the area, the whole process. And it's really interesting for me to understand to discover new areas and new fields. And it helps me to be interested when I'm creating the report. And at the end, I think that I earned something, not only by creating the report, but also by finding some information about the area. And it's so interesting for me.
Yeah,
If this modeling, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, George.
Oh, well, if this is to be answered by someone interviewing for an analyst role, not to be very cynical, but I would say that you want to enjoy the data cleaning and the wrangling and all that, because that's what you're going to be doing. And a lot of people don't know that, and they don't sound excited about it. So you want to get to the point where you force yourself to love it. It may be hard, but you'll get there. And if you can answer that in an interview sincerely, then the manager is going to see the value in what you can do. It's, that's maybe a little self-serving, but it's the truth. So, yeah.
Whereas I would say if anybody told me that data cleaning was their favorite part, I would immediately know they were lying to me.
That's true too. Yeah. I mean, I kind of like that part because it goes hand in hand with the exploration and some of the things that Hossein was talking about. I don't know if it's my favorite part, but it's the part that we do the most. So you better like it to some extent.
Other thoughts on favorite parts?
For me, it would be modeling. And by extension, I guess data loading would take into account some of the things that George was mentioning. But I tend, as a consultant to the government, every time I find a need for any cleaning, I pass it back to the source, and hopefully they can clean up their data. And so I can bring it in and do less and less of it in Power BI, because if the organization is storing poor data, they can't make decisions for it in other paradigms other than Power BI.
Going back to Hussein's point, about kind of the first stage, there was a famous statistician who was asked kind of why he liked statistics, and he said, because it lets me play in everybody else's backyard. And I've always loved that. I've always loved that quote, because it really is true that in data analytics, you really get the chance in many cases to just address data sets and issues and analyses that are way outside the scope of what you thought you'd get involved in. And I personally find that fascinating, when you get to dig into not only a new data set, but kind of a whole new business process or a whole new field. And so, I think in terms of the interest in this as a profession, that's one of the things I find, most attractive about it. All right, so I know we've got a Power BI crowd here, but I'm going to ask this question anyway. Maybe we can talk beyond just Power BI about what tools or software do you prefer using in various phases of data analysis, and why?
For me, I mean, the exploratory data analysis step, like when you're first getting a data set, I tend to just go to Python just because you can do it very quickly. So other tools in that, Excel, I mean, I use Excel for everything. I mean, if you need to get some quick wins, it's very easy to just open up a spreadsheet and use it. But those are the two I kind of go back and forth with outside of Power BI.
I'd say PowerPoint and Excel.
Me as well. PowerPoint and Excel. Those are my two go-tos.
Yeah, because it involves a whole lot of iteration with the business analysts, and those are tools that they're familiar with. So that's where you got to live.
I'm surprised Greg SQL is not on your list. I would have heard that one coming from you.
I love SQL, but then again, generally it's when I'm talking to my compatriots or to the IT group, the business analysts, they don't really care about SQL.
I was saying you had a point you wanted to raise.
Yeah. As Greg mentioned, I really like using SQL Server, but it's what ID teams usually do with, and I really use Excel. And sometimes if I need something that I can achieve by using mQuery, I use Power BI.
I have a question for the people who responded using PowerPoint for some of the, I believe, earlier parts of the process. What sorts of tasks are you doing in PowerPoint?
Very quickly, one of the things that I try and do is get the business analyst to put together boxes on a PowerPoint slide with the questions that they want to answer and what their thoughts are on what might be the answer. It really helps to, it's very common that people say, well, we want all the data. Well, that doesn't help me in anything. I want to know what question you want to answer. You know, put 4 boxes on a slide on a PowerPoint, ask 1 question per box. And they say, holy geez, now I got to think, well, we're going to actually need 2 slides or 3 or 4 or 5. I got lots of questions I want to answer. And I go, that's great. That's terrific. And at least with PowerPoint, it's different than Power BI. You're not getting stuck in the idiosyncrasies of the data or the characteristics of the data. You're focusing on the questions. So that's one really good use I see for it.
I think, Greg, to that point, you know, one of the things that I found was that managers in particular get very conditioned by Excel in terms of kind of what analysis looks like and also what it can and can't do. And so when I would ask them questions about what do you want this analysis to do, what I found was they were constrained by thinking about it through Excel. And so they would hold back from asking questions that they knew would be difficult or impossible to answer in Excel. And so what I started doing is saying, instead of, you know, kind of at a practical level, saying if you had a magic 8-ball and you could ask it any question about your data you wanted to, without regard to whether or not it was feasible to do that analysis, what would you ask? What would you want to know? And that kind of helped get them out of the space of thinking about it in the constraint of what they thought was possible. Because just with the tools we've got now with Power BI and Python and R and, you know, all the things you can integrate together, I think there's so many more things we can do than were possible in just Excel. And so, you know, kind of helping get them out of that mindset, I found to be something that was quite useful. And rarely did I ever get a question in that dialogue where I thought, I don't know that we're going to be able to answer that. You know, even the ones they thought were not feasible, it was like, no, that's not a problem. We can do that.
I got a point to that. On the flip side of that, you know, in my work, I often get like, oh, let's build a model to predict something. And often, a lot of times you can answer stuff just with like really simple statistics. So I'm almost on the other end of that, trying to, kind of persuade people to move away from that kind of really super detailed, data science buzzword things, to just looking down at just how can we answer these questions as simply as possible. So yeah, I struggle with that, at least in my field.
And I wasn't necessarily saying jump to the complex, but it was like, don't be constrained off the bat by what would you think might be feasible or not.
Okay. Got it.
Although I do have the tendency to overcomplicate things.
Hey, I'm with you on
that.
So one thing I wanted to, there was an interesting question I came across. It said, why do you think creativity is important for a data analyst? And I know George actually had a poll question recently on LinkedIn, is do you consider yourself creative or not?
There were quite a few who said no. I don't remember the exact split. But for me, it's that ability to match up incongruent points, knowing where to go next. I remember times where I was doing a study of cleaning times at a hospital, and I got to the point where I was looking at blueprints that engineering had sent me to figure out, the time, minutes per cleaning time. And I mean, like, who the heck would think to look at blueprints for a data analysis project? But here I was doing it. So that kind of undaunted drive, I think, kind of comes with creativity, that you're really confident in your abilities, and you can't necessarily play it safe. You have to, you still have to verify what you're doing. But what I mean by that is that you have to kind of push yourself to the data that you use. And I think creativity comes when you are confident in your abilities and your ability to answer those questions.
Great point.
I totally agree with George. And I think that creativity is so important because it can help the users, the ones who want to use your report, to not to spend much time to use it, to understand it so easily. And if you put, for example, all the information in one page, or create some advanced visualizations for those that they don't need to use them, or put some visuals that are not related to each other, or something like that, it made hard for them to understand the report. And creativity is one of the things that really helps you to give them what they want, what they really want.
Yeah, I think creativity comes with confidence. Just to kind of reiterate what George said there, I think that we may think we are or are not creative, but I think with your experience and your confidence level in what you're doing will be a good measuring stick of how creative you are in what we do, because we have to think outside of the box a lot of times in order to get to where we need to go. And I know one question I always ask every client, and now I typically work in the same industry, but I ask every client is, what are you trying to get out of your data that you're not getting right now? Almost kind of like what you said earlier there, Brian, is like, what are your pain points? Or I think it was Greg that said that. Or what are your pain points, and how can we get there? Don't worry about Excel or how you're seeing the data right now. Just tell me, what is it that you're not getting out of your data right now that you want me to provide for you?
I would just add on the creativity front too, just to add to what Hossein said, simplify. The question that's being asked might be very complicated, but chances are there's a simpler question and a simpler answer that can be given. So again, instead of having 5,000 visuals, on your report page, you might only need 3 to answer the question that they want. And if it answers the question, that's totally sufficient. You don't need the 1,000 visuals.
And I think George's point is one that really resonated with me about, kind of the drive to look beyond just the information you're given. And we get this question a lot in challenges, which is it okay to bring in additional information? And I always say, not only is it okay, but it's almost mandatory in some cases, because to answer the questions you really want to answer, the most important questions, you shouldn't just be limited by the data you're given. And many times it's going to require kind of creatively going out and seeking more information. And so, the creativity to recognize when that's needed and where to go for that data. And sometimes is George's example was a great one, that, it's not obvious places you look for that. It's, blueprints or, historical records or, all sorts of different places where that supporting data can come from. Any other thoughts on that one? All right, so I think we'll wrap on I think a good closing question, which is talk about a time when your analysis made a real difference in the outcome for your client. Play the Jeopardy music here.
Well, to go back to a consulting assignment I had, I'm guessing about 7 years ago now, we did produce, it was before Power BI was around, so it was using SSRS reports, but there was a branch of the Canadian government that was responsible for managing all of the people around the world that wanted to come to Canada. They called it the Global Case Management System. And they upgraded that piece of software every 2 weeks to handle the myriad, like thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of different business rules that apply to different people, different countries, different whatever. So we produced a set of 100 different policing reports that showed how people around the world were using the tool differently. So you couldn't compare one country to another, or one demographic to another, or whatever. And they were able to take that information and streamline their processes such that people were actually the case officers were actually treating information the same way in different parts of the world. So it cleaned up the data a whole bunch and made it something that you could actually draw statistics from, rather than it being a whole bunch of separate buckets.
It's a good one.
Maybe one for me is I have to bring in Power BI's mortal enemy, which is Tableau. But I worked for a large hotel booking client where we had analysts all around the world, especially in Southeast Asia. All these analysts, they would run marketing campaigns, and everybody had their own set of knowledge, how to execute a campaign, how to run it, what were the trends. And, we would have big meetings and we would take all that at face value. But, once we got to a point where we could bring all that data into a centralized tool and create like trends and statistical analysis, it told a completely different story. And everybody had access to this kind of one version of the truth. And then the whole team could go and optimize their campaigns just based on this one tool, and everybody was kind of speaking the same language at that point. So I found that as like a really big win, because if we didn't have that kind of one version of the truth, everybody would have their own kind of specific way of doing things. So we got a lot of efficiencies out of that.
That's a great way to put it. I like that one version of the truth. I don't want to put Hussein on the spot here, but I know in the work he's doing with, clinical trials and everything, I'm sure that there are some, some really major outcomes that come out of that. So I wonder if there are any, kind of specific stories you can talk about in that regard.
Yeah, in clinical trials, you may always see something, these things that may surprise you, because when you are running a clinical trial, you are, for example, comparing two drugs, one drug for your company with another drug that is submitted before. And maybe always, the result is surprising. And also by running descriptive statistics and exploratory analysis, you will find some information that may be new for you and you didn't know about these data. And sometimes it helps you to have a better understanding of your product, your drug that you're producing. And it may help you to have a better idea for the next clinical trial, for the next drug, for example, or you can either use that information to, for example, run another clinical trial if your results are not what you expected.
Great, interesting. So I said I was going to wrap on that question, but there's one more I have that actually I want to hear what people think on that, which is
moderator's prerogative.
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking. We still got 8 minutes. So, how do you plan to improve yourself professionally in this coming year?
I definitely want to get better at presenting. That's something I really want to focus on. I'm in Singapore now, and you walk into a room and you have like people who speak 4 or 5 different languages. So English may not even be their first language. So definitely want to get better at presenting and I think really simplifying things. So that's probably going to be my focus this year.
And what are the steps you're going to take to kind of improve presentation skills?
That's a good question. Right? Well, here's one. But no, definitely I have been looking at different, like now you have COVID. I thought about, maybe joining different like clubs where you're presenting things or like, what is it? Toastmasters or something like that. It's very difficult to do with COVID, but I'm just communicating with different people on different topics. Like I'm in a book club now and talking to people about books. I find that helps me get a little bit better at kind of explaining things and reading the room in a sense. So that's probably where I'm going to put my focus right now.
Yeah, I would say whatever it is, and especially for people coming into the field, don't be afraid wherever you are to share what you know and not let imposter syndrome kind of get in the way. And I think that being with Enterprise DNA is great with that because of the forums and the challenges, and there's so many opportunities to really be active in what you're learning. For me, I'm trying to learn a bit more about Azure and fitting Python into various Microsoft BI projects, because those are kind of 2 stacks of knowledge that I know somewhat that I'm trying to bring together. So things like that, where you see little grains of knowledge or interest that you have, being able to connect those dots, because that's another thing with analytics. There's so much of a convergence of, like we were talking about, using Python with Power BI or using Excel with Python or whatever. So, those kinds of projects are great too, but being able to express your knowledge, and that goes into communication, just not being afraid wherever you are. You've got something to contribute. None of us here knows everything about Power BI or analytics or anything. We're always getting stuck. I mean, every day there's something I have to look up. So if you can develop those skills to get unblocked and have the community that, when you need help, that who to turn to and who to ask those questions, then that's a skill in itself too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I use Google 100 times a day. It'd be impossible to work without it.
For sure.
For me, for learning, Vega Lite and Deneb are the two that are interesting to me right now. So I'm looking forward to that reaching a 1.0 release, hopefully later this year.
Yeah, that one's definitely on my learning list for the coming year too. And you're talking about Google. It's funny. It's a meme you see all the time that the Data Analyst keyboard is just 3 keys. It's Stack Overflow shortcut, copy and paste. Yeah, but I think there is a lot of truth to that, just in the sense that you just can't hold all this information in your head, and that going out to community and out to the internet and knowing where to look and having those resources, just among this expert team. I mean, there's probably at least once a day that I'm posting something to the team saying, has anybody come across this situation, or how do you handle this? And, it's gotten to the point now where, Power BI and analytics in general is just so powerful and so multifaceted that no one person can learn even a fraction of what there is to know.
Yeah, that's one big thing that I've got since I've been a part of Enterprise DNA, is just being a part of this, not only the community, but now the experts group. I have a wealth of information of people to talk to. And what I typically do at my company, I'm the only one that knows how to do this. So a lot of times I don't have anybody to kind of fire off questions or thoughts about. And I know I hit you up quite a few times, Brian, or a lot of other people in the experts groups numerous times throughout the week, just to kind of to maybe see how you would tackle an issue, or how you would handle something. So I know that's helped me grow to where I'm at right now, and that's something that I would encourage others to, especially if you're not around people that are doing what you're doing a lot, become part of a community, whether it's the Enterprise DNA community, some kind of community, and get yourself a buddy or buddies to share information back and forth with, because that's what's going to help you grow more than anything. More so than a book or any kind of video that's out there. You need that interaction with another person.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think back to the challenges, and the best work I've ever done and the most I've ever learned was in the challenges that we did together as a team. Just learning from 3 other people who are great at what they do, and who've got different ideas and different processes. That was just an amazing learning experience, and I would really commend that to anybody to to give that a try.
Exactly.
It also keeps you from jumping down the rabbit hole and losing 2 or 3 days on an idea that might not be useful. When someone else says, "What are you new?" Of course, we're not going to do that.
I jump down those rabbit holes even with the team. Hussein, you had a point you wanted to raise?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And what I want to focus on this year is learning mQuery by Melissa Widows in Enterprise DNA. And also, I want to focus on R graphs and R charts, and how can I import them to Power BI to look perfect, and how I can use, for example, a statistical analysis, not so advanced, but with the level that I can import it to Power BI.
Great. Well, we're coming to the end here. I just want to close with, some thoughts from the hiring manager side of things. And I'll start off. I've spent about 20 years as a hiring manager and hired dozens of people, probably seen, thousands of resumes, done probably hundreds of interviews. And I think technical skills are really important, and the specific skills you have in your toolbox are critical. But I would almost say in an interview process, to really sell the broader skill set, that the particular tools you've got at hand today may not be the tools that are needed tomorrow. And that really what I've always looked for, kind of the analogy I've always used is a sports analogy, which is that I always try to draft the best athlete available, not the drafting for position. in terms of not looking for a specific technical skill set, but looking for people who can learn, kind of have that thirst to learn, are adaptable, are creative, work well together as a team, have kind of a strong analytical foundation, but not necessarily tied to one particular program or skill set. I think the broader you can express your capabilities, I think the better off you're going to be in an interview setting, because as I say, programs come and go, but those foundational skills are something that are in demand forever. Caleb, I know you've done a lot of hiring. Do you have some thoughts on that?
No, yeah, definitely. I agree with you 100%. I think if someone's able, because you can be tool agnostic. I mean, like you said, tools come and go. There are always going to be better tools that come in the future. But I think on top of what you said, maybe just having a strong handle on the foundations, like just a statistical understanding, and being able to sell yourself, and also being able to storytell. I think I would hire someone that didn't maybe have a strong, kind of handle on a tool, if they were able to kind of just, explain something in a very convincing and thorough way.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things we used to do is have people come in and present a project you've done in 20 minutes on any topic, any type of project or topic you want. And, it doesn't have to be anything even related to what we do. And in some sense, it's even better if it's not, because, somebody who can take and explain, something about, the electric power grid, or, about, some sort of, chemical bioassay, that is useful in terms of, if you can break that down and communicate that to an audience that knows nothing about that topic, that's a really valuable skill.
Mm-hmm.
So any final thoughts before we close today? Well, I want to thank everybody for your time. This has been great. I hope that for those watching and those who are looking at a data analyst career or looking to advance your career, that this has been some good food for thought for you. Definitely look forward to your comments and feedback. Love to gather this panel or another panel similar, and do some other roundtables kind of along these same lines. So again, thanks to everybody, those who got up early, those who are staying up late. Really appreciate your time and your thoughts, and enjoyed it. So until next time, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.